Ice fishing isn't just about cutting a hole in the ice and dropping a line. There's an entire world of techniques, strategies, and specialized methods that separate the weekend warriors from the serious cold water predators. And trust me, by the end of this series, you'll understand exactly why some anglers consistently pull monster fish through the ice while others sit there freezing with empty buckets. But here's what makes this different from every other ice fishing video you've watched. We're not just going to tell you what these techniques are. We're going to break down exactly when to use each method, why it works, and how to execute it flawlessly. Because knowing about jigging is one thing, but understanding how to match your jigging cadence to water temperature and fish activity levels, that's what separates the pros from everyone else. Let's start with the foundation of all ice fishing success. Still fishing might sound boring, but don't let the name fool you. This technique is responsible for more trophy fish than any other method, and there's serious science behind why it works so effectively in freezing water. When water temperatures drop, fish metabolism slows dramatically. They're not chasing fast-moving baits or responding to aggressive presentations. Instead, they're looking for easy meals that require minimal energy expenditure. The beauty of still fishing lies in its simplicity and effectiveness. You're presenting a natural bait in the most realistic way possible, letting it sit motionless or with just the slightest movement from water current. But here's where most people mess up. They think still fishing means doing absolutely nothing. Wrong. The best still fishermen are constantly making micro adjustments, reading their electronics, and positioning their baits with surgical precision. Your bait selection becomes absolutely critical with still fishing. Live minnows are the gold standard, but you need to match the size to your target species and the time of year. Early ice calls for smaller baits because fish are still relatively active. Deep winter demands even smaller presentations as fish become increasingly lethargic. Late ice brings opportunities for larger baits as fish start feeding more aggressively in preparation for spring. The key to still fishing success is understanding depth zones and structure. Fish don't randomly distribute themselves under the ice. They follow predictable patterns based on oxygen levels, food sources, and thermal layers. Your electronics become your best friend here, helping you identify the precise depth where fish are holding and the structure they're relating to. Now let's talk about jigging, which is probably what most people picture when they think about ice fishing technique. But traditional jigging is just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about aggressive jigging, subtle jigging, dead stick combinations, and specialized cadences that trigger strikes from even the most negative fish. Aggressive jigging works best during first ice and late ice periods when fish are more active. You're using sharp, pronounced rod movements to create maximum flash and vibration. This technique excels for attracting fish from a distance and triggering reaction strikes from predatory species like walleye and northern pike. The key is varying your jigging amplitude and frequency until you find what triggers bites on that particular day. Subtle jigging becomes essential during the deep winter months when fish are holding tight to structure and showing minimal feeding activity. We're talking about tiny movements, barely perceptible rod tip actions that impart just enough motion to make your bait look alive without spooking wary fish. This technique requires incredible patience and sensitivity to detect the lightest bites. The dead stick technique revolutionized ice fishing by combining the best of both worlds. You've got one rod actively jigging to attract fish while a second rod sits motionless with a live bait presentation. Fish often follow the active lure but strike the stationary bait instead. This technique consistently outproduces single rod presentations, especially for species like crappie and bluegill that prefer to inspect their food before committing. Tip-ups open up an entirely different dimension of ice fishing strategy. These devices let you cover multiple holes simultaneously while targeting different species and depth zones. But successful tip-up fishing requires understanding flag management, bait presentation, and strike detection in ways that most anglers never consider. The positioning of your tip-ups matters more than you might think. You're not just randomly scattering them across the ice. Strategic placement based on underwater topography, wind direction, and fish movement patterns can make the difference between a slow day and a cooler full of fish. Understanding how to read the terrain beneath the ice and positioning your tip-ups accordingly separates successful ice anglers from those who rely purely on luck. Bait presentation with tip-ups involves considerations that don't apply to rod fishing. You need to account for line twist, proper depth setting, and bait action without the ability to actively work your presentation. The type of tip-up, the way you rig your line, and even the weight of your sinker all influence how effectively your bait moves and appears to passing fish. Strike detection with tip-ups is an art form that requires understanding fish behavior at the most fundamental level. When that flag pops up, your first instinct might be to sprint over and set the hook immediately. But that's exactly how you lose fish. Different species have completely different ways of taking bait, and reading the line movement through the hole tells you everything you need to know about what's happening down below. Pike and muskie typically grab a bait and run with it, creating that classic flag pop followed by rapid line movement. But here's the crucial part. You need to let them run and turn the bait before setting the hook. These predators grab prey sideways initially, then reposition to swallow head first. Set too early and you'll pull the bait right out of their mouth. Set too late and they might drop it after realizing something isn't right. Walleye present an entirely different challenge. They often pick up a bait and hold it motionless, creating what looks like a false flag. You'll see the flag up but minimal line movement. This is when patience becomes your greatest asset. Let them hold that bait, feel for subtle line movement, and wait for that telltale pull that indicates they're actually taking it down. Moving into specialized presentations, the Swedish pimple technique has gained serious traction among serious ice anglers. This isn't just about using Swedish pimple lures, it's about understanding the unique jigging cadence that makes these baits incredibly effective. The technique involves sharp upward snaps followed by controlled falls, creating a wounded baitfish action that drives predators absolutely crazy. The beauty of this technique lies in its versatility across species. Walleye respond to subtle Swedish pimple presentations worked just off the bottom. Lake trout hammer aggressive Swedish pimple techniques in deep water. Even panfish can't resist smaller versions worked with finesse presentations. But the key is matching your cadence to the conditions and target species. Spoon fishing under the ice requires completely different considerations than open water spoon fishing. The confined space and limited water movement change how spoons behave and how fish respond to them. Flutter spoons create incredible action on the drop, but you need to understand how to work them effectively in the limited vertical space beneath the ice. The drop and pause technique with spoons can trigger strikes from fish that ignore other presentations. You're lifting the spoon sharply, then letting it flutter down on controlled slack line. Fish often strike during that fall, so maintaining contact while allowing natural action becomes crucial. This technique particularly shines for lake trout and other deep water species that relate to suspended baits. Blade baits bring vibration into play in ways that other lures simply can't match. These thin metal baits create intense vibration patterns that cut through cold water and trigger strikes from lethargic fish. But working blade baits effectively requires understanding how different retrieves create different vibration signatures. The key with blade baits is varying your lift speed and amplitude. Slow, steady lifts create tight vibrations that appeal to negative fish. Sharp, aggressive lifts produce wide vibrations that attract active predators. The pause between lifts often triggers strikes as fish key in on the sudden silence after intense vibration. These techniques represent decades of knowledge passed down through generations of serious ice anglers. From mastering the subtleties of still fishing to perfecting the aggressive presentations that trigger trophy strikes, each method has its place in your cold water arsenal. The difference between hoping for fish and consistently catching them comes down to understanding when and how to deploy these techniques. Now get out there, apply what you've learned, and start pulling fish through the ice like never before.